The first thing that hit me wasn't the insult, it was the smell. A sharp, chemical lemon scent, the kind that tries so hard to cover up something unpleasant, it becomes unpleasant itself. It was the industrial-strength cleaner they use in public restrooms, an odor of sterile anonymity. It clung to the air in the narrow, silent hallway, a stark contrast to the delicate scent of roses and lilies that drifted from the grand ballroom. The doors to the ballroom were propped open just enough for me to hear the murmur of happy guests, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft, elegant strains of a string quartet. That sound, that smell, that was my welcome to my own sister's wedding. I stood there for a long moment, my hand clutching the strap of my beaded clutch so tightly that I could feel the individual beads digging into my palm, a painful, grounding sensation. Before me was a small round table, an obvious afterthought, barely large enough for one person. It was draped in a plain white linen cloth that didn't quite match the luxurious, floor-length damask inside. On it was a single place setting and a name card. My name, Karen, was written in a perfect, impersonal calligraphy. The table was placed with chilling precision directly beside the heavy oak door of the ladies' restroom. On the other side, a large stainless steel service trash can, the kind with a swinging lid, stood sentinel. This was it. This was my seat. The lakeside resort in Vermont was breathtaking in late autumn. The foliage was a riot of crimson and gold, a perfect fiery frame around the sapphire glass of the lake. It was the kind of setting people dream of for their wedding, a setting I had, in part, paid for. The renovations to the main lodge 2 years ago, my father's brilliant idea, had run over budget. I was the one who had quietly transferred the $20,000 needed to finish the job, an investment, he'd called it. A loan. It was, of course, a gift he never acknowledged. I had driven 3 hours from Boston, navigating the winding country roads, my mind a turbulent mix of hope and dread. Hope, that fragile, foolish thing, whispered that maybe this time would be different. Maybe Lila's marriage would mature her. Maybe my parents, seeing both their daughters grown, would finally see me. The dread, a much more familiar companion, knew better. It sat heavy in my gut, a cold stone of certainty. On the passenger seat beside me sat a meticulously wrapped gift, a Tiffany box holding a heavy crystal frame I'd spent weeks choosing, a symbol of a hope I couldn't seem to extinguish. My phone buzzed in my clutch, a sharp vibration against my palm. I already knew who it was, my mother, Margaret. The message was short, a preemptive strike, a carefully aimed dart meant to manage me before I could even have a reaction to manage. It read, "Please, Karen, no drama today. It's Lila's day." No drama. The words were a masterpiece of gaslighting, as if I were the one who orchestrated these small, cruel cuts. In our family, drama was any time I expressed a need, a hurt, a boundary. My feelings were the inconvenience. My existence was the potential for drama. I typed back a single, sterile word. Understood. It was the response of a good soldier, a compliant daughter, a role I had played for 35 years. A young woman with a clipboard and a frazzled expression appeared at my side. She was one of the wedding coordinator's assistants, her professional smile stretched thin. "Miss Hayes?" she asked, her eyes darting from me to the table, then quickly away, a faint blush creeping up her neck. She couldn't even look at me. "This will be your seat. We can have cocktail service brought out to you here." Brought out. The words implied exile. I looked at her, then at the table, then toward the sound of laughter from the ballroom. I could see the head table through the crack in the door, a long, magnificent affair, draped in silk and overflowing with flowers. I could see my parents, beaming. I could see the empty chair where the maid of honor should be. a role Lila had assured me was too much pressure for me to handle, giving it instead to Jessica, her friend of 6 months. "There must be a mistake," I said. My voice was barely a whisper, thin and weak in the sterile hallway. It sounded like someone else's voice. The coordinator's blush deepened. Her discomfort was genuine, but her orders were clear. "I'm sorry, Miss Hayes. The seating chart is final. It was approved by the bride." Approved by the bride. Of course it was. Approved. A formal, final stamp on a lifelong verdict. I was the afterthought, the addendum, the footnote in the grand story of the Hayes family. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who paid her own bills since she was 16, who put herself through architecture school with scholarships and loans, who bought a sensible condo in Boston, while my sister, Lila, lived in a chic downtown apartment my father's investments, funded by my emergency loans to him, paid for. I was the one who was always fine, who never needed anything, and now I was the guest seated next to the trash. The finality of it was both shocking and completely, horribly predictable. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. The energy for that had left me years ago. I simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement of my head. The coordinator scurried away, visibly relieved to be escaping the profound awkwardness of the situation. I placed my clutch on the small table and sat down, my silk dress whispering against the cheap chair. I looked at the restroom door, then at the trash can, and I waited. I knew she would come. The artist always has to admire her masterpiece. She didn't make thee wait long. The string quartet inside swelled into a triumphant crescendo, the closing notes of a piece I didn't recognize. And then she was there, Lila. She appeared in the doorway like an apparition, a vision in layers of white tulle and lace, her blonde hair swept into an elaborate twist that sparkled with tiny diamond-like clips. She was glowing, radiant, every inch the golden child she had always been, the sun around which our entire family system orbited. Behind her, a few of her bridesmaids, including her new maid of honor, Jessica, hovered like ladies-in-waiting, their faces a mixture of pity and smug curiosity. Lila's blue eyes, the same shade as our mother's, scanned the hallway before landing on me. A slow, perfect smile spread across her perfectly painted lips. It wasn't a kind smile. It wasn't even a happy one. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. The smile of a predator that has successfully cornered its prey. She glided towards me, the hem of her expensive dress rustling on the polished floor, a sound like whispering insults. "Karen," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, a tone she reserved for moments of public cruelty. "There you are. We were wondering where you'd gotten to." Jessica let out a little titter behind her, a sound like a bird choking on a seed. I remained seated, my hands folded in my lap, my back ramrod straight. A strange calm was settling over me, a cold, heavy thing in the pit of my stomach. It was the calm of a deep, frozen lake. Nothing could break the surface. My body was preparing for an impact it had sustained 1,000 times before. "Hello, Lila. You look beautiful," I said. My voice was even, almost robotic. I was proud of it. It didn't betray the tremor in my hands or the frantic beating of my heart. Her smile widened. She gestured around the hallway with a delicate, manicured hand, a theatrical sweep that took in the restroom door and the trash can. "Looks like they finally figured out where you belong." She leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, though it was loud enough for her friends and anyone passing by to hear. "Guess you don't count." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shards of glass. And in that moment, something inside me, something I had been holding together with sheer force of will, with hope and duty, and the desperate, pathetic desire to be loved by my own family, it didn't just break. It vaporized. It turned to dust and blew away on the sterile, lemon-scented air. All the years of being second best, of being the invisible pillar holding up the family while Lila danced in the spotlight. All the canceled plans, the loans that were never repaid, the holidays where my achievements were a footnote to Lila's latest minor drama, the time in college when I won a major architectural award and my parents missed the ceremony because Lila had a really bad breakup and needed them. All the times my mother told me, "You're the strong one, Karen. You can handle it," which was code for, "Your needs don't matter as much as your sister's." It all coalesced into this single, perfect, venomous moment. For years, my entire emotional existence had been a desperate attempt to earn a seat at their table, to be seen, to be valued. And here was my answer. My seat was in the hallway. I didn't count. And as I looked into my sister's triumphant eyes, I didn't feel the familiar sting of tears. I didn't feel the hot shame of humiliation. I felt nothing. A profound and terrifying emptiness that was quickly replaced by a cold, sharp, and utterly liberating clarity. It was like a switch being flipped in a dark room. The snap. The pain, the hurt, the desperate need for their approval, it all vanished. In its place was a quiet, humming certainty. I was done. Not done in a dramatic, tearful screaming match kind of way, but done in a final, irreversible, scorched earth kind of way. In that instant, I stopped trying to be loved and started planning to protect myself. I looked up at her, my expression unreadable. "You know, Lila," I said, my voice as calm as the frozen lake inside me, "there's always been enough space for both of us. You're the one who keeps shrinking it." A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. This wasn't the reaction she wanted. She wanted tears. She wanted a scene. She wanted to tell everyone later how difficult I had been on her special day. "Oh, please, Karen, not everything's about you. This is my day," she snapped, her voice losing its sugary coating. "You always make everything so difficult." "Do I?" I asked, a genuine question. "Or do I just make it possible?" The jab hit its mark. Her eyes narrowed. "You sound just like Dad," she spat, the words meant to be the ultimate insult in our family. A synonym for failure and bitterness, pathetic and bitter. "Face it, Karen, nobody needs your approval, not here, not ever." And that was it. That was the final nail. She turned up her heel, her dress swirling around her, and swept back into the ballroom, her bridesmaids trailing behind her like pilot fish. I was left alone again in the hallway, with the smell of lemon cleaner and the sound of their laughter. But something had changed. I was no longer a victim in their play. I was the audience, and I had just decided the show was over. Thank you for being here with me. If you would, please let me know what city you're listening from in the comments below. I'd love to know how far my story has traveled. I sat there for another minute, letting the cold clarity solidify within me. My mind, usually a whirl of emotions when it came to my family, was suddenly a quiet, orderly place. It started working like the architectural software I used every day, logically, methodically, pulling up old files and blueprints of past injustices. This wasn't a new injury. It was the final symptom of a chronic disease, and I was finally diagnosing it correctly. My phone was still in my hand. I didn't call anyone. I opened my banking app. It was a habit, a grim ritual I performed every few months, a form of self-flagellation I hadn't understood until now. I scrolled back, and back, and back. The numbers on the screen were the ghosts of my family's failures. each one a testament to my role as the silent financier, the secret backer of their entire lives. There it was, from 3 years ago, a wire transfer for $15,000 to an account under my father's name. His excuse had been a can't-miss investment opportunity in commercial real estate. I found the text message exchange I had saved in a locked folder. Him promising this was the one that would set us all up for life. Me asking gentle questions about risk and due diligence. Him turning cold, his messages becoming clipped. Do you not trust your own father, Karen, after everything I've done for you? What he'd done for me was a mystery, but the guilt worked. I sent the money. A month later, I was visiting my parents and overheard him on the phone in his study with my Uncle Mark, talking about a bad beat at a high-stakes poker game in Atlantic City. The investment had been a lie. I never said a word. I just saved a screenshot of the text exchange. That was a down payment on a small house. My house. Gone. I kept scrolling. Another transfer, 2 years ago, $8,000 to Lila. She had cried on the phone, a masterful performance of panicked sobs, telling me her startup idea, a boutique company selling artisanal organic candles, had run into some supplier issues. She needed a bridge loan to keep her dream alive. I knew it was a vanity project. I knew Lila had the work ethic of a pampered house cat. But the thought of her failing was more than my mother could bear, which meant the emotional fallout would ultimately be my burden to carry. So I paid. The company folded 6 months later, but not before Lila took up business trip to Bali with her friends, flooding Instagram with cocktails, infinity pools, and sunsets. I saved the pictures. I also saved the email from the credit card company about her maxed-out card, which they had sent to my address by mistake. Her name on an account for which my father was the co-signer, and for which I knew I would eventually be asked to help. This was my life's secret ledger. I wasn't just the responsible daughter. I was the family's unofficial, interest-free line of credit. I was the human safety net. My savings account wasn't for my future, my dreams, a promotion, or a new life. It was a slush fund for their irresponsibility. Every time I hit a savings goal, a new emergency would arise. My father's car needed a new transmission. My mother needed a small loan for a country club fee she'd forgotten about. Lila needed her rent covered because she'd overspent on a designer wardrobe for a job interview she hadn't even gotten yet. The memory of the BMW incident came back to me, sharp and painful. It was the one time I had said no. Lila had decided she needed a new BMW convertible to project the right image for her non-existent candle business. The price was astronomical. I had just gotten a major promotion at my firm, my first big step up, and for the first time, I was seriously looking at real estate. Not just a condo, but a small piece of land, a place where I could one day design and build my own home. A foundation of my own. When I told Lila I couldn't help, the rage was volcanic. But it was my mother's call that night that truly broke something in me. I can still hear her voice, not yelling, but worse, low and steeped in a profound, weaponized disappointment. "Karen, I just don't understand you," she'd started, the familiar opening gambit. "Mom, it's a $70,000 car. I can't just—" "It's not about the car," she'd cut me off. "It's about family. It's about support. Your sister is trying to build something, to make a name for herself, and you won't even help her. We are a family. We are supposed to lift each other up." "I lift you up all the time," I'd said, my voice shaking. "My entire salary seems to be dedicated to lifting this family up." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she'd scoffed. "You do well. We're proud of you. But you're sitting on all that money. What for? A little plot of land for yourself? It's so selfish. I always told everyone you were the easy one, the independent one. but I see now that independence has made you cold. You have a cold heart, Karen. A cold heart. Because I wanted to build a life for myself instead of endlessly funding theirs. I didn't argue anymore. I just remember hanging up the phone and sitting in the dark in my condo, the silence pressing in on me. I looked around at the life I had built, piece by piece, with my own two hands, and I realized that to them, it was nothing more than a resource to be tapped. My success wasn't a source of pride for them. It was an asset on their balance sheet. I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was a utility. And the most insidious part, they had convinced me it was my duty, my responsibility. To question it was to be selfish, to be difficult, to be unloving. For years, I had accepted that narrative. I had let their definition of family override my own sense of self-worth. I closed the banking app. The coldness in my stomach was now a block of ice. I had the receipts, not just the financial ones. I had the emotional ones too, years of them, all neatly filed away in the archives of my memory. Lila's casual cruelty was just the final entry in a ledger that was overflowing with debt. And in that moment, in that sterile hallway, I decided it was time to call it in. The family business was about to go into foreclosure. My mind drifted further back, past the endless transactions, to a quiet, dusty attic 2 summers ago, right after my grandmother's funeral. My grandmother, Rose, had passed away. She was my father's mother, but in every way that mattered, she had been mine. She was the only one who ever saw me, really saw me. I remember being 10 years old, meticulously drawing a floor plan for my dream house with a ruler and a cheap protractor. Lila had laughed and called it boring. My mother had patted my head and said, "That's nice, dear," before turning to praise Lila's messy finger painting. But my grandmother had sat with me for an hour, asking me where the windows would go, how the light would fall in the morning, where the load-bearing walls would be. She was the one who bought me my first real set of drafting pencils, who praised my detailed drawings, who told me my methodical nature wasn't a flaw but a superpower. "You see the world in lines and structures, Karen," she'd said once, her hand warm on mine. "Don't ever let anyone tell you that's not a beautiful thing." Her death left a hole in my life that I knew would never be filled. The family, of course, was less concerned with the loss and more with the inheritance. My grandmother was a frugal woman who had inherited the lakeside resort property from her own parents. It wasn't the bustling business it was today. It was a charming but slightly faded collection of cabins. My father had convinced her to let him manage it, bringing in investors and turning it into the high-end venue it was now, taking all the credit and, as I now suspected, much of the profit. After the funeral, my father held a family meeting. He produced a will, signed and notarized, leaving the entire property jointly to him and my mother. Lila was ecstatic, already talking about using it as her personal party palace. I felt a pang of disappointment, but said nothing. It was his mother, after all. But a few weeks later, while I was helping clear out my grandmother's house, the house she had lived in her whole life, I found something. Tucked away in a cedar chest at the foot of her bed, beneath a pile of hand-stitched quilts that smelled of lavender, was a large manila envelope. My name was written on it in her elegant, familiar script. Inside was another will. This one was dated 6 months after the one my father had produced. It was drafted by a different lawyer, a firm in Burlington I'd never heard of. My hands trembled as I read it. It was a complex document, a testament to my grandmother's sharp mind, but the core of it was shockingly simple. My grandmother had left the entire lakeside property, the land, the buildings, everything, to me. I sat on the floor of the dusty attic, the smell of cedar and mothballs filling my lungs, and I cried. I cried for the loss of her, and I cried for this final, incredible act of love. She had seen it all. She had seen how they treated me, how they used me. She had protected me, even after she was gone. But there was a catch. My grandmother was a smart woman. She knew that simply handing me the property would cause a war that would tear the family apart and paint me as the villain. So she had included a clause, a brilliant, subtle tripwire designed with an architect's precision. The clause stated that while I, Karen Hayes, was the sole legal owner, my parents, David and Margaret Hayes, would retain lifetime usage rights to the property for family purposes. They could live there, host holidays, and enjoy it. There was, however, one very specific condition. The property was never to be used for commercial purposes without my express written and notarized consent for each individual event. Any such unauthorized use would immediately and irrevocably void their usage rights, at which point the property and all its operations would revert to my sole unencumbered control. She even specified what constituted commercial use, including renting it out for events like weddings, where venue fees, vendor kickbacks, or sponsorships were involved. It was a test, a loyalty test from beyond the grave. She was giving my family the rope, trusting that their greed would eventually lead them to hang themselves. And I, being her granddaughter, the methodical one, understood the structure of it perfectly. I contacted the lawyer in Burlington. He confirmed everything. He was the executor of this, the final will. He told me my grandmother had instructed him to remain silent unless I came to him or unless he was made aware of a breach of the contract. I never told my family. I put the will in a safe deposit box and waited. What was I waiting for? I didn't know. Maybe I hoped they would change. Maybe I hoped I would never have to use it. It felt like a nuclear option, a weapon too terrible to deploy. Until today. As I sat in that hallway, the pieces clicked into place with the satisfying snap of a well-designed blueprint. Lila's wedding. It was a massive, extravagant affair. I knew for a fact that the Belmonts had contributed a huge sum, essentially sponsoring the event. My parents were charging them a venue fee that went directly into their pockets, something my mother had boasted about on the phone. This wasn't a family gathering. This was a commercial transaction, a flagrant breach of the one condition my grandmother had set. They hadn't just insulted me. They had, in their arrogance and greed, handed me the keys to their destruction. And as this realization dawned, a plan began to form in my mind, not born of rage, but of a quiet, calculated sense of justice, my grandmother's justice. The decision was made. The cold block of ice in my stomach was now my engine. I stood up, my movements smooth and deliberate. I straightened my dress, picked up my clutch, and walked not toward the exit, but back toward the ballroom. The music was louder now, a cheerful melody that felt jarring and alien. Peeking through the doorway, I saw the guests mingling, champagne in hand. I saw my father laughing with Mr. Belmont, clapping him on the back. I saw my mother adjusting Lila's veil, her face a mask of maternal pride. They were all actors in a play, and none of them knew the final act had been rewritten. My eyes scanned the room until I found what I was looking for, the gift table. It was piled high with elegantly wrapped boxes and envelopes. My gift was in the car. I had to retrieve it, but I had something else to add to it now. I slipped out a side door I knew led to the business center. The resort was quiet on this side, the sounds of the party muffled. The business center was empty. I sat down at a computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard. First, I logged into my email and found the saved conversation with Lila's old colleague, Sarah. We'd met for coffee a few months back after a chance encounter at a conference. When she found out who my sister was, her face had soured. She told me Lila hadn't just been a nightmare to work with, she had actively tried to sabotage Sarah's career. She used to brag about Noah, Sarah had said, shaking her head. She'd say he was sweet but naive. That a few fake tears and she could get him to sign anything. She was laughing about how she was going to get him to make her a partner in his family's company after the wedding. She called him her golden ticket. It was vile, but at the time, I'd filed it away as more evidence of Lila's transactional view of the world. Now, it was ammunition. I then accessed the secure cloud storage where I kept my life's documents, my digital receipts folder, the screenshots of my father's gambling lies, the emails about Lila's startup. I selected a few of the most damning examples, the ones that painted the clearest picture of a family built on my labor and their deceit. I printed everything in crisp black and white. Then I pulled out my phone and a small, elegant card from my clutch. I wrote a simple, clear note. Noah, I believe you deserve to know the full price of this wedding. Some of it is detailed here. Your bride is a bigger liability than you know. This isn't a marriage. It's a hostile takeover. I'm sorry you were caught in the crossfire of my family. Sincerely, Karen. I walked back to my car, my purpose a shield against any stray glances. The gift I had bought was the beautiful, expensive crystal photo frame from Tiffany's. I had imagined them putting their wedding photo in it. The irony was bitter. I carefully opened the box, removed the sample photo of the smiling generic couple, and slid my note in its place, facing outward. Then I retrieved the small, sleek digital photo frame I had also purchased weeks ago, a backup gift, a plan B I didn't even know I was formulating. I loaded the screenshots onto a tiny memory card and inserted it. I set it to begin a slideshow the moment it was plugged in. I walked back to the gift table. I placed the Tiffany box prominently on top of the pile. Beside it, I placed a thick, cream-colored envelope. Inside were not screenshots, but a printed copy of my correspondence with the Burlington lawyer and a crisp, clean copy of my grandmother's final will. I had a second copy in my safe deposit box. This one was for them. I placed them side by side, the public humiliation and the private, legal annihilation. Two halves of the same whole. My final gifts to the family. My work was done. There was nothing left to say. There was no grand confrontation, no tearful goodbye. I simply turned and walked away. I moved through the opulent lobby of the resort, past the smiling staff who had no idea of the rot beneath the polished surface, and out into the crisp autumn air. It felt like walking out of a stuffy, airless room and taking the first deep breath of your life. The air was clean and cold, and it filled my lungs, clearing out the last vestiges of that lemon-scented poison. As I reached the parking lot, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a picture of my Uncle Mark, my father's brother, smiling at a family barbecue. For a fleeting moment, I felt a wave of warmth. Uncle Mark had always been the cool uncle, the one who would slip me a $20 bill, the one who seemed to stay above the fray of my family's dysfunction. I answered, a part of me hoping for an ally. Karen, what in the world is going on? His voice was a strained whisper. Your mother is having a fit. She said you were making a scene. I didn't make a scene, Uncle Mark. I was seated in a hallway and I left, I said, my voice flat. A hallway? Well, I'm sure it was just a mix-up. These things happen at big weddings. Listen, you need to turn around and come back right now. You're embarrassing the family. Whatever it is, just apologize to Lila and smooth it over. The Belmonts are here. We need to present a united front. A united front. The words echoed in the cold air. A front, an illusion, and he, the good old Uncle Mark, was a part of it. He didn't care that I was hurt. He cared about appearances. He cared about the Belmonts' money and influence, which he undoubtedly hoped to benefit from through my father. He wasn't an ally. He was a collaborator, a quiet enabler. The realization was just one more small cut, but I was past bleeding. There's nothing to smooth over, I said, my voice hard now. Goodbye, Mark. Karen, don't you dare hang up on me. I helped your father secure the financing for the lodge renovations. A deal with the Belmonts would be good for all of us. You owe this family. I ended the call before he could finish the sentence. The casual admission of his financial entanglement with my father, with my money, was the final confirmation. He wasn't just an enabler, he was a beneficiary. I opened my contacts, found his name, and pressed delete. One more toxic tie severed. It was surprisingly easy. I got into my car, the leather cool against my skin. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, looking back at the resort. The windows of the ballroom were glowing, a warm, inviting yellow. Inside, a life was continuing without me. A life I had subsidized, supported, and suffered for. A life I was now, finally, gloriously free from. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt powerful. Not a loud, aggressive power, but a quiet, solid strength that came from deep within. It was the power of knowing your own worth. It was the power of drawing a line in the sand and walking away. I started the car. The engine purred to life, a quiet sound in the vast parking lot. I put it in reverse, my eyes on the glowing ballroom one last time. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound sense of pity for the people inside, trapped in their gilded cage of lies and transactions. Then I put the car in drive and pulled away, the sound of my own tires on the gravel, the sweetest music I had ever heard. I didn't look back. I was about an hour down the highway, heading back to Boston as the sun began to set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple, when my phone, which I had placed on silent, began to light up the dark car. It was a flurry of calls, one after another. My mother, my father, Lila, my mother again. I ignored them all. I was driving toward my new life, and they were not invited. The full story of what happened in that ballroom came to me later, piecemeal, from two sources. The first was a long, rambling, tearful voicemail from a distant cousin, a woman who had always been kind to me in a quiet way. The second, a few days later, was a calm, collected email from Noah Belmont. Together, they painted a picture more vivid and satisfying than anything I could have imagined. According to my cousin, the gift opening had been Lila's idea. It was an old-fashioned tradition, but Lila wanted another moment in the spotlight. She sat on an ornate chair, a princess on her throne, while Noah stood beside her. My father made a speech about family and unity that, in retrospect, was drenched in irony. Lila, with her flair for the dramatic, had scanned the pile of gifts and her eyes landed on the elegant Tiffany box. "Ooh, let's open Karen's first," she'd announced, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'm sure it's something sensible." Jessica, her maid of honor, let out a mean-spirited giggle. Lila tore off the ribbon with a flourish. She lifted the heavy lid. And then she froze. The room, which had been buzzing with conversation, fell quiet as everyone watched her. Her smile faltered. She pulled out the crystal frame, and the note I had written was visible to everyone at the front. Noah, seeing the look on her face, gently took the frame from her hands. He read the note. My cousin said his face, which had been beaming with love all day, went completely blank. It was a terrifying, still kind of blankness. He then noticed the second gift, the digital frame. He picked it up and saw the small power adapter. Without a word, he walked over to a nearby outlet and plugged it in. The screen lit up, and the slideshow began. The first image was a screenshot of Lila's text to a friend. "He's so easy to handle. Cry a little, and he buys anything I want." A collective gasp went through the room. Lila lunged for the frame, but Noah held it up, his arm blocking her. The next image appeared. An email chain between Lila and her business partner for the candle company, outlining a plan to solicit a $50,000 investment from Noah for a business that had already been dissolved. My mother started to say something. There must be some mistake, but the next image silenced her. It was the screenshot of the text I had received from Sarah, Lila's old colleague. She called him her golden ticket, laughed about making him a partner in his family's company. That was when Victoria Belmont, Noah's mother, stepped forward. Victoria was not a woman to be trifled with. She was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, a woman with a spine of steel and an allergy to nonsense. She looked at the screen, then at Lila, her eyes like chips of ice. "I've had my suspicions," Victoria said, her voice clear and cutting, carrying across the silent room. "My son is a good man, perhaps too trusting, so I had my own people do a little digging. These messages," she said, gesturing to the screen, "are entirely authentic." Lila started to crumble. "It's not true. It's Karen. She's making it all up. She's always been jealous of me," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "She's behind this. Karen's behind all of it." Jessica, ever the loyal sycophant, stepped forward. "Lila would never. Karen is a bitter, lonely woman who can't stand to see her sister happy." Victoria Belmont turned her icy gaze on Jessica. "And you are?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. Jessica stammered her name. Victoria gave a dismissive wave of her hand. "Sit down. The adults are talking." Jessica turned beet red and scurried back into the crowd. It was then that the most unexpected thing happened. Mr. Evans, the wedding coordinator, who had been standing stiffly by the door, cleared his throat and stepped forward. He held up his own phone. "Forgive me, Mrs. Belmont," he said, his voice respectful but firm, "but I believe this might be relevant." He pressed play on a recording, and my sister's voice, dripping with venom, filled the hall. "Looks like they finally figured out where you belong. Guess you don't count." The raw, undisguised cruelty of it hung in the air, undeniable. Victoria Belmont looked from the phone to Lila, her expression one of utter disgust. "Funny," she said coolly. "The only thing your sister did was tell the truth." The final image in the slideshow appeared. It was a simple screenshot of a bank transfer. My $15,000 loan to my father. Noah unplugged the frame. The screen went dark. He turned to Lila. He was no longer the adoring groom. He was a stranger, his eyes cold and distant. "This is over," he said quietly. He reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a folded set of papers. He placed them on the gift table. "This is an annulment petition," he said, his voice steady. "I already signed it. Our marriage was never consummated. It will be as if this day never happened. The divorce will be clean." Lila stared at the papers, then at him, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. "You'll regret this," she screamed. My father finally found his voice. "Lila," he said, his face pale, "you should apologize to your sister." Lila rounded on him, her beautiful face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Apologize to her? She's not even family." And my father, for the first time in my memory, looked at her with something other than blind adoration. "That's where you're wrong," he said, his voice heavy with a truth that had arrived 30 years too late. The scene in the ballroom was one of utter chaos. Lila was screaming, my mother was sobbing, and the Belmonts were making a swift, dignified exit, their guests following in a wave of shocked whispers. But the final, devastating blow didn't come from a digital frame. It came from a phone call. As my father tried to reason with a hysterical Lila, his cell phone rang. He glanced at it, saw the unfamiliar Burlington area code, and almost ignored it. But something made him answer. He put the phone to his ear, his expression confused. And from what my cousin described, the color drained from his face. He stumbled back, leaning against the head table for support. He held the phone away from his ear, his hand trembling, and fumbled to put it on speaker. Mr. David Hayes, this is Richard Peterson from Peterson and Howe Legal. I am the executor of the final will and testament of Mrs. Rose Hayes. A new silence fell over the remaining family members. My mother looked at my father, her tear-streaked face a canvas of confusion. I am calling to inform you, the lawyer continued, his voice dispassionate and precise, that you are in breach of contract as per the codicil regarding the lifetime usage rights of the Lakeside Resort property. The final will of Mrs. Hayes explicitly forbids any and all commercial use of the property without the prior written and notarized consent of the sole heir, Miss Karen Hayes. My father could only stammer, "Commercial use? This is a family wedding." "Our records indicate," the lawyer said, and I could imagine him looking at a file, "that a significant venue fee was paid by the Belmont family for the event, not to mention payments from multiple third-party vendors and sponsors. This constitutes a commercial transaction. As per the terms of the will, your usage rights and those of your wife, Margaret Hayes, are hereby terminated, effective immediately." There was a pause. The lawyer let the words sink in. The silence in the room was absolute. "I'm sorry," my mother whispered, grabbing my father's arm. "I don't understand. What does that mean?" "It means, Mrs. Hayes, that you are trespassing. The property, its assets, and all revenue from its operations now fall under the sole, unencumbered control of the legal owner, Miss Karen Hayes. She has instructed our firm to take over management of the resort. Our representatives will be on site tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to secure the premises. We advise you to have all your personal belongings removed by that time." The phone went silent. The call was over. That was the coup twist titlo, the masterstroke my grandmother had designed. They hadn't just lost a wealthy son-in-law, they had lost everything. The resort, which they had treated as their personal kingdom, the source of their income, their social standing, their entire identity, it was gone, and it now belonged to the daughter they had just tried to discard in a hallway. My cousin said Lila just stopped screaming. She looked at my parents, her eyes wide with a horror that had nothing to do with her failed marriage and everything to do with her now empty bank account. She looked at the opulent ballroom, the flowers, the half-eaten cake, and saw it all for what it was, a stage set for a life she could no longer afford. The hubris, the sheer blinding arrogance of it all. They had been so certain of their power, so sure of my silence, that they never even considered reading the fine print of their own lives. They had walked right into the elegant, perfectly constructed trap my grandmother had laid for them, and the key, the very thing that had sprung the trap, was Lila's own greed and vanity. Her desperate need for the grandest wedding imaginable had been the instrument of their downfall. I wish I could say I felt a surge of triumphant joy when I heard this part of the story, but I didn't. I just felt a profound, quiet sense of order. The world had been off-kilter for a very long time, and now, finally, the scales had been balanced. The foundation of their lives was built on my silent sacrifice, and I had just, with one quiet act, pulled the cornerstone out. The rest was just gravity. Please do me a favor and like this video and comment with the number 1 below, just so I know you've journeyed with me this far. Your support means more than you can imagine. It truly encourages me to keep going. Please comment with a 1 and let me tell you the rest of my story. The drive back to Boston was a blur. The flashing lights of my phone were a constant frantic pulse in the passenger seat, but they felt like they were happening in another world. 16 missed calls from my mother, 8 from my father, a dozen from Lila, each one from a no-caller ID number after I'd blocked her, and a flood of texts. Please, Karen, we didn't know. That was from my mother. You've ruined us. You've ruined everything. You bitch. That was Lila. We need to talk. Call me. That was my father. I read them at a stoplight, my face illuminated by the screen's glow. There was no apology, no remorse for how they had treated me, just panic. The panic of people who had lost their safety net, their ATM, their foundation. Their "we didn't know" wasn't about my pain. It was about my grandmother's will. They were sorry they got caught. When I got back to my condo, the silence felt different. It wasn't the lonely silence I had grown accustomed to. It was a peaceful silence, a clean slate. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on my couch, and watched the city lights twinkle outside my window. For the first time, my home felt completely my own, not just a way station between family obligations. I didn't sleep. Instead, I went online. I looked up flights, not to anywhere exotic or far-flung, but to Portland, Maine. I found a small, secluded cabin for rent on a rocky stretch of coastline, with a stone fireplace and a wide deck overlooking the Atlantic. I booked it for a month. The next morning, while my lawyer's representatives were walking the grounds of my resort in Vermont, changing locks and taking inventory, I was packing a bag. I packed sweaters, thick socks, good books, and my laptop. I called my firm, spoke to my boss, a man who had always been supportive, and told him I needed to take a personal leave of absence, effective immediately. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Take all the time you need, Karen. Your promotion will be waiting when you get back." I left my car in the garage, took a cab to the airport, and by lunchtime, I was in Maine. The air was different there. It was sharp and clean, smelling of salt and pine. It was the kind of air that scoured you clean from the inside out. The cabin was perfect. It was small and sturdy, built to withstand the northern gales. I spent the first few days just being. I walked for hours along the rocky beach, watching the tide come in and out, a rhythm as old as time itself. I sat by the fire, reading novels I'd been meaning to get to for years. I drank my tea and watched the gulls soar on the wind. I ignored my phone. After a few days, the frantic calls and texts slowed to a trickle, then stopped altogether. The silence was a balm. One afternoon, I sat on the deck and finally went through the dozens of voicemails. My mother's, pleading and crying, blaming me, blaming Lila, blaming my father. My father's, gruff and demanding, ordering me to fix this mess. Lila's, a string of profanity-laced tirades that devolved into desperate sobs. I listened to all of them, one by one, like a researcher studying a dead language. There was no love in their words, only need. I deleted them all. An evening later, an email arrived from Noah Belmont. It was short and formal, but underneath the words, I could sense a deep and genuine decency. He apologized again for my being caught in the middle of his disastrous mistake. He told me that the annulment was being processed. He also informed me that his mother, Victoria, had been so impressed by the structural integrity of my plan that she had looked up my architectural firm. She had, he wrote, a new commercial development project in Boston and would be reaching out to my boss to request me, specifically, to lead the design team. It came with a significant salary increase and creative control. I stared at the email, a slow smile spreading across my face. It wasn't about the money or the job. It was the beautiful, exquisite irony. My family had tried to cast me out, to make me small, to put me in a hallway. And in defending myself, I had not only reclaimed my inheritance, but had also been handed the biggest career opportunity of my life by the very family they had tried so desperately to impress. That night, I walked out onto the deck. The sky was a vast, dark velvet cloth, studded with a billion sharp, brilliant stars. The only sound was the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore. I thought about the glowing ballroom, the frantic people trapped inside, their world shrinking, and I looked up at the infinite, open sky, and I felt my own world expanding. I was finally free. I spent a month in that cabin in Maine. It was a time of quiet reflection, of healing the old, deep wounds I had carried for so long. I realized that my family's dysfunction was a house of cards, and I had simply refused to be one of the cards anymore. I hadn't acted out of malice. I had acted out of self-preservation. I had chosen myself. For the first time in my life, I had truly and completely chosen myself. I made some decisions there, in the quiet solitude of the coast. I decided to sell the resort. It held too many ghosts, too many bitter memories. I instructed my lawyer to handle the sale and to set up a trust with a portion of the proceeds. The trust would provide my parents with a small, fixed monthly income, enough for a modest apartment and their basic needs, but nothing more. It was not forgiveness. It was a closing of the books, a final, non-negotiable boundary. I would not allow them to be destitute, but I would never again be their ATM. I owed them that much and not a penny more. Lila was not included in the trust. She was young, able-bodied, and for the first time in her life, she would have to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. I returned to Boston a different woman. The weight that had settled in my shoulders for years was gone. I walked taller. I took on the Belmont project with a newfound confidence and creativity, and it was the most fulfilling work of my career. I never spoke to my sister or my parents again. Sometimes I would hear things through the family grapevine. My parents were living in a small condo in Florida. My father was working part-time at a hardware store. My mother volunteered at a local library. They were living a quiet, anonymous life, the kind they had always scorned. Lila had apparently tried her hand at a few different jobs, real estate, sales, but couldn't seem to hold any of them down. She had lost the glow of the golden child. Without the cushion of family money and my support, her charm had proven to be a currency with very little value in the real world. I don't revel in their downfall. I take no pleasure in their diminished lives. Their fate is simply the natural consequence of their own choices. They built their house on a faulty foundation, and it was always destined to collapse. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in my office, looking at the blueprints for a new building, a structure of strength and beauty I am creating from scratch, I think about that day. I think about the hallway, the smell of cleaner, the cruelty in my sister's eyes. And I feel a profound sense of gratitude. That moment of ultimate disrespect was, in fact, a moment of ultimate liberation. It was the gift they never intended to give me. It taught me the most important lesson of my life, that your value is not determined by the seat they give you at the table. Your value is inherent. It's in the integrity of your work, the kindness in your heart, and the strength you find to walk away from anyone who tells you that you don't count. Because sometimes the loudest, most powerful revenge isn't a scream. It isn't a fight. It's the quiet, steady sound of your own footsteps leaving the room. Thank you so much for listening to my entire story. I truly appreciate you. Please comment with the letter A so I know you are one of the special people who made it all the way to the end. If you have any thoughts or feelings about what you've heard, I would love to read them. And please feel free to click on another video on my channel to enjoy more of our stories.